Depending on your point of view, this plant is either the source of one of the most dangerous substances known, or it's an attractive annual which makes a dramatic statement in a municipal flower bed. I'm John Robertson of thepoisongarden.co.uk, and this is the story of Ricinus communis, the castor oil plant. Before we talk about the plant itself, it's worth looking at this business of names, because Ricinus communis gives us a very good example of what can happen with common names. There's another plant called Fatsia japonica, which looks very similar to the Ricinus communis. So much so that it was given the common name false castor oil plant. Now that shouldn't be a problem. Ricinus communis, castor oil plant. Fatsia japonica, false castor oil plant. The trouble comes though that many garden centres don't like labelling something false. They think it may put you off buying it. And for that reason most garden centres will label Fatsia japonica and not put a common name on. If you ask a member of staff, they'll probably tell you that it's the castor oil plant. This can lead to confusion. I've known people who went to a friend's house, saw Fatsia japonica. In the UK it's a very popular house plant. They saw Fatsia japonica and said, "What's that?" And their friend said, "That's the castor oil plant." So they went to their local garden centre, asked for the castor oil plant and were sold Ricinus communis. For many of them, when they found out just how poisonous Ricinus communis is, they were concerned as to whether they should remove it from the garden immediately. I just said Ricinus communis is a very poisonous plant, and so it is. But if you've looked at any of the other stories on thepoisongarden.co.uk, you'll already know that there's a big difference between poisonous and harmful. For a poisonous plant to become harmful, there has to be a way of administering the poison. Ricin is a substance contained in the beans produced by the plant, the castor beans. These are crushed to produce castor oil, which is still used today more as a lubricant than as a laxative, but it is still produced in quite large quantities. And ricin is a deadly poison in tiny amounts. This leads many people to believe that it's a particularly dangerous substance, and for some reason it's become a favourite, particularly with the press, as a potential bioterrorism weapon. Potential. There's no evidence of ricin ever being used in a terrorist attack of any sort. And I really don't think it would be. Because the thing about ricin is that if it's going to kill, it has to get into the bloodstream. If you ingest it, it's strongly emetic. You're very likely to become very sick and eject the poison in that way. It's been estimated that historically something like 1.9% of the people who ingested a large amount of ricin died, and the researchers who established that figure went on to say that they think modern treatment methods would reduce that to about 0.4%. So 0.4% of the people who eat ricin would die from it. Hardly a high success rate for a terrorist. You could inhale it and get it into your lungs. And that's the favourite with the press. They talk about it being used as a spray, an aerosol spray on the tube network. But there's a problem with that. Ricin is a heavy molecule, and although you can make an aerosol spray with it, that aerosol spray is very unstable if there's any sort of air current. So on a tube network in particular, it would very quickly blow to the ground and become completely harmless. You would not use ricin to try and launch a mass attack on an underground network because it simply wouldn't be successful. People who talk about the problem of inhalation often cite some research that was done on animals. But what they fail to appreciate is that in that research the animals were forced to breathe air that was laced with a measured amount of ricin, which is a very different situation from having it just out in the open air sprayed into a public place. The other way in which ricin could get to you and kill you is if it gets into the bloodstream by injection. And that's the most famous case of ricin poisoning. Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov in 1978 was stabbed with a specially adapted umbrella which injected a pellet which it's widely believed contained a tiny amount of poison ricin. And the pellet got into his bloodstream, the ricin was released, and he died. It's worth noting that a colleague of his who lived in Paris had been attacked a couple of weeks previously, but he survived because the pellet didn't penetrate far enough to get into the bloodstream. So even injection in that way is not always a successful method. When people write about ricin as a weapon for criminals, terrorists or dissidents or whatever, they will often cite examples. But in almost every case, those examples are examples where ricin was thought to be present, or was potentially there, or had been produced but didn't have any ill effects at all. In fact, there are no known murder cases since 1978 where ricin has been the murder weapon. And yet, it continues to have this reputation as a fearsome bioterrorism weapon. And the interesting thing is that a number of sources writing about this make the point that it is its very reputation that makes it potentially useful. Because the press have built up this huge hysteria about the possibilities of ricin poisoning on a large scale, anyone using ricin would have a good chance of causing hysteria. Not a very good chance of causing mass poisoning, but a good chance of causing hysteria and panic in the population. The situation has become so bad that the press even introduced ricin where there is no reason to at all. It's thought that there was research on the possibility of using ricin as far back as the First World War, but it came to nothing because it was realised that it wasn't going to be a useful weapon. Recently, the United Kingdom National Archives declassified a report produced in 1945. It was a report about the possibility of creating darts which could be dropped in their thousands to fall vertically onto enemy soldiers. And the idea was the darts would be poisoned and they would be able to kill enemy soldiers in this way. The press, when they reported the release of this document, said that the poisons would probably be anthrax or ricin. There was no reason for saying that because the report doesn't mention ricin or anthrax. The report actually says that the substance to be used on these darts would need to disable immediately and kill within 15 minutes. Now ricin is slow. Ricin will take several hours to produce any symptoms and may take days before it produces death. So there is no way that ricin was going to be used. In fact, in the report, they give a code number for the substance they were intending to use, and it is not ricin. And yet the press, because it's to do with poisoning, it's to do with weaponisation, have to include the words ricin. The reality is that there are lots of better ways to kill people than using ricin. In America in particular, it's not just the press who have a thing about ricin. The military seem to also believe that it could be a problem. And you read reports which set out all the reasons why ricin would not be suitable as a bioterrorism weapon and then conclude that it is a threat. It beggars belief. In the United Kingdom you see Ricinus communis growing in municipal flower beds, in parks and by the sides of roads. It grows, it reaches maturity, it produces its fruits which contain this deadly poison ricin, and it never causes any harm. Can it really be that the local parks department of your local authority understand more about ricin than the best, supposedly best security experts in the United States of America? I'm John Robertson, and you can learn more about all sorts of poisonous plants by visiting thepoisongarden.co.uk.